To learn about the off-grid lifestyle and to be inspired to live your dreams, click subscribe so you don't miss anything. Hit the bell notification. So in several videos now, I have told you that my neighbor has given me some really big trees. Now, I can kind of give you a comparison. He's gave me 3. They're just up the hill right here, just 100 yards or so, 50 yards, I don't know. Yeah, but they're sitting right next to the road, just like this one is. I would say out of the 3 trees, this size right here would be the smallest tree. The largest tree is probably double that size. One of them's dying, the other 2 are dead. When you cut a dead tree, it's a little bit more unpredictable than a living tree, because when you cut, there's what they call a hinge, and that hinge kind of guides when you make your cut. It kind of guides where the tree's going to land. And if the wood's dead, that hinge doesn't hang on as well and it breaks loose. I've been doing a lot of research. Just the other day, I made a video where I showed you that I had some wedges and I had a new axe, or sledgehammer axe, whatever you want to call it, that I can pound the wedges in. In that video, I showed you how to measure the height of a tree. Well, I did that with these 2 oak trees, and I found that they are about 80 to 90 feet tall. So that puts this electric line in the way. So I got trees that are going to be up here by the road, right? And then it's got to go through all these saplings. So if I just laid it straight back, it would fall on those power lines. So it's important to know how tall the tree is. Now, another thing I learned, which I found very interesting, is how to determine the lean of a tree. All trees have leans. So most of them have multiple leans. Now I'm going to try to do this backwards. So imagine you hold your hands up like this, right? I'm going to try to do it backwards so you can understand what I'm doing here. What you do is you put your hands next to the part of the limb, right? Now, all you have to do is find the center of your hand. You find the center of your hand, which is about right here, and then you come down and you see that there's a lean there. Then all you have to do is come to the base of your tree and you can measure how far that is, and that's how you know how big your lean is. This is important because when you cut your tree, you have to compensate for that lean. If you want to cut your tree and it land this way, you're actually going to have to face cut your tree. Let's say it's 7 feet. You're going to have to face cut your tree 7 feet at the point that it's going to land. So we already know that 90 feet out, I had to measure out 7 feet. So in that video, I was saying how it's important to get an education. You got to go to college. You got to understand what you're doing before you actually get out there and do it. I would say like a doctor. A doctor goes to school for so many years, learns all about biology, and then he goes and does an internship, learns about surgeries and practices with surgeries with someone who has a lot of experience, and then he gets the experience over time. Well, that's what I'm doing. Is right now I'm getting the education, and then I'm going to try to get the experience. I also learned something else the other day. For the longest time, I've been sharpening the chain of my chainsaw the old-fashioned way. You know, I got a little guide here. So one of the things I have to get an education on is how to sharpen the chainsaw. Thought I was really going to try to research how to sharpen chains, and I have learned a ton of information. In order to sharpen a chainsaw, you buy, according to the instructions of the chainsaw, the correct size file. It's a round file, looks much like this one. It's just a file. And then you buy this little guide. You have to pay attention to what your instructions say and what kind of chain you're going to need, but once you know what your instructions say, I know that my chainsaw file size is 5/32. So you buy a 5/32 file. I have 2, and then you buy yourself a guide. Now the guide does 2 things. One, it tells you the angle of attack. Right here you can see that there's an angle. I think you can see that. If you can't, there's a 35. It says 35 degrees. And so what you got to do is you simply line this line here on the guide up with your chain. So you should be able to draw a straight line. So now all you got to do is just do that. And it's kind of a feel thing. When it's not sharpened, it's kind of chattery. It sticks and chatters and chatters and chatters. But as it starts to file out, you do it, it's just one smooth stroke. Now, I have always been told that you're supposed to file every tooth with the same amount of strokes. However, I just learned that's not true. So the entire time, I've been doing 4 strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, next tooth, 1, 2. Well, the problem is that tooth may not have been sharpened. But they say if you don't sharpen each tooth the same number of times, that you will start cutting at an angle, that it'll start pulling to one side or another. Well, I just watched a video yesterday, a 45-minute video, very good video, explaining, and this is actually the second video. I watched one other that said it, but he seemed like kind of a woohoo, crazy kind of, happy guy. So I didn't have a lot of trust and faith in him. But the second guy seemed pretty down to earth. Most people say, oh, once you become experienced, you don't need this guide. And he said, that's not true. You always need the guide. What the guide does is, like I said, it gives you the angle. Well, over time, you can learn the angle. What you can't learn is the depth. If you look at a chain, I have one sitting here, you'll see that the guide sits right on top of this flat spot. And so if you get too deep, you won't actually cut the spot that you're supposed to be cutting. You want to cut right there on that edge, right there on the edge. It's hard to show on the camera, but there's an edge here that you got to get just perfect. And so that guide actually makes that perfect. So then you sharpen each side. Now, he said that you can sharpen as much as you want until you get done, and I'll explain what actually controls this angle thing here in a second. And then you come to the other side because there's a blade on each side. You got a blade here and a blade here. And then you come to the other side and you do the same thing. Okay? But now he said, take a file without the guide and do it again. This time, you're getting down here in this moon shape. You're not up here, you're down here. Now, most people who sharpen blades say that's not important, but he proved it was. He took a brand new chainsaw blade, brand new, right out of the box, and he cut a log. And it took him 26 seconds to cut the log with the brand new chain. Then he dulled the chain. He just run it in the ground and it was dull. He couldn't cut the log. It was definitely dull. Then he just sharpened it with the guide. He didn't do the crescent moon, he just did the guide. And that took him, when he cut the log, 22 seconds. So he knocked off 4 seconds by sharpening it with the guide. So it was actually sharper than the manufacturing. Then he came back in and he did the moon. So now he sharpened the top and now he sharpened the bottom. And he got down to 18 seconds. So he knocked off another 4 seconds. And then the third thing you got to do is you have to use this depth gauge. The depth gauge is used to file off what they call rakers. So here you have a blade and here you have a blade, right here and here. In between you have these little rakers. The raker actually does what it says. It rakes out the debris and it does something else. It controls the depth of the cut. If this thing is too tall, it won't cut because this is taller than the blades. It won't cut. So if you get it too deep, then you'll try to cut and you won't be able to cut because it's digging in too deep. So there's a precise depth. In my case, it's 0.25. So what you do is you lay this in between. It's going to be hard to do here. Like this. And you file off that raker. Okay? So to demonstrate on the blade, you set this here and you file off that raker. Now, what that does is it keeps all your cut depth equal. So before I was telling you, everybody said that you have to make it the same number of strokes. That's not true. You have to make sure that each one of these is in the same depth as the blade is. That way it doesn't gouge in or it doesn't loosely cut. And that's the problem, is you get one blade that cuts real deep and another blade that cuts real shallow. And so you're starting to curve off when you start to do your cut. I tested out this chainsaw this morning. Of course, I didn't do this how many seconds test because I just came out and I sharpened the moon is what I did. I already had the depth gauge. I already knew what that was about. I already knew what this was about, but I didn't know about that moon. And so when I came in and I cut that moon shape out, oh, it cut like butter. I've not seen this chainsaw cut so smoothly. So I would have never learned that from experience. I wouldn't have known any better. There was no reason for me to know, because anything that ever told me anything was you use this. So experience and an education together go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So I hope that when you start your dream, whatever that is, that you will take the time to get an education. Thanks for watching.